here today moderating this panel on a topic that is of interest and of importance to many of our members. It used to be that we would say it was of interest to Canadian members who are involved in investment attraction from China. Increasingly, we have more and more Chinese members who are becoming Canadian companies as they invest among our membership. And the other trend we see is, of course, members that are now seeking investment from Chinese companies as well. And I think the current environment in the post-Nexon approval stage leaves people with a lot of questions about what is happening with investment and what's the future. So today we have three panels that represent very diverse perspectives, and I'm confident we're going to have a lively conversation today. Mr. Charest is, of course, our Canadian expert on the panel. Mr. Jiang brings with him the knowledge of Canada as a destination for China Development Bank's funding support, and he has been responsible for sending work teams to Canada, and Canada is the only country that CCBC has sent more than one work team to, showing the importance of the opportunity there. And Sarah Zeng, of course, has been involved as a participant in Chinese companies investing abroad. So she brings with her the perspective of an investor, as well as knowledge on the general M&A. And so I'm going to kick it off. I'll start with Sarah. Now, you've worked in different capacities in your career, including for foreign firms investing in China, as well as with Chinese firms investing abroad. So how would you assess the current status of Chinese overseas investment, 10 years in or so, in terms of what lessons they've learned, what kind of experience they've gained, and what achievements they've made?
China has implemented its so-called go-out strategy for 10 years by now. At the early times, Chinese overseas investment was dominated by SOE, with primary focus on energy and natural resources in developing and EPC construction in developing markets. But now you see, the investors are more diversified. You see the private companies, very equity funds, new entity are very active, and the developed markets like US, Europe are getting bigger share of investment from China, and the deals getting bigger and more sophisticated, and also besides energy and natural resources. The Chinese companies are also very keen on targets that has technology, brand names, and international markets. So with those changes, you can imagine, it's easy to understand why the Chinese overseas investment growth has been double digits for last 2 or 3 years, right? Reaching 87 billion in 2012. This is 17% from 2011, and this year, as of end of August, we see another 17% up. So anyway, I think in terms of what they have Chinese investor has experienced in the past 10 years, it's really not so much different from the learning curve US company had to go through when they make investment in China. I was country manager for El Paso for 8 years. We built power plants in China. So anyway, I think the only difference is US company had to learn the role of the government in the economy, and how connection works in China, and why connection is important. And Chinese investors, when they go out, they learn something new as well. They learn this, corporate social responsibility. They had to learn the role of community relationships. They had to learn, the role of union, and they had to learn actually the mayor of a small city is not that important. So anyway, so I think, I mean, the advice that I would give to Chinese investors, I mean, they should be, when they do deals, they should be more strategy driven, not deal driven. They need to do more of their homework, and they need to grow their in-house international manager or expertise, so they can hold the acquired company against their peers in the local markets as benchmark, okay, to review their performance.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Charest, tell us about the investment climate in Canada. What are the new investment rules meaning for this climate, and how are they affecting the level of investment in our country?
Well, to really get a solid reading of Canada, we have to start with the basics, and we are a country of 35 million people only. Canada has a very high level of living, and we're a rich country because we trade. We are very trade dependent. So Canada depends on foreign trade and foreign markets, and with a small population base, and we're blessed with natural resources, but also a knowledge-based economy. We should not let the natural resources side, blind from the fact that we do have a very advanced economy. We need foreign direct investment, and we've always needed foreign direct investment. But as you will know, Sarah, it always has been a debate in Canada on how we control our resources. Not unlike debates that happen everywhere else in the world, by the way. And we're not alone. There is a trend now, we know in the world, of what is called resource nationalism around the mining sector, which is not unique to any jurisdiction. I think it's interesting to observe. It's as true in developing countries as developed countries, as is the case in Canada. Now, in the more recent events, I think there's a pre-CNOC Nexon world and a post-CNOC Nexon world as far as China is concerned. And we know there's a great complementarity of our economies in regards to the need of energy in China, whether it's oil or gas or other forms of energy, and our natural resources in the mining sector. The CNOC Nexon deal was watched very carefully. I think it was tricky for Canada. Remember, we had an investment, a Foreign Investment Review Act that was voted in 1985. In fact, I was in the government at the time, and the perspective of the act in 1985 was to open up the economy, to welcome foreign investment. Now, there are a number of rules that are provided in that are pretty well understood. There's a threshold of investment by which you have to have a review. Whether you invest or not, you have to notify, whatever the amount. Above a certain amount of $344 million, you have to submit yourself to a review, and done by the Department of Industry and under the jurisdiction of the minister. Now, that threshold, by the way, is going to increase over the next few years. We're going to move to $600 million, $800, and up to $1 billion threshold. Now, what the Nexon CNOC deal changed is that in regards to the narrow area of the oil sands, the government has said that looking ahead, they will apply stringent rules in regards to any acquisition that is specifically tied to the oil sands. That's one part. The second part is that the government has said in regards to SOEs, so this is of direct concern to China, there are also a set of criteria that the government will take into account when there is an investment made by state-owned enterprises in regards to transparency, to governance, to whether or not this SOE is directed control politically. So they've been pretty clear on saying there's a different category here that is going to have to pass a different test, and a more stringent test in regards to acquisitions in Canada. As of 2009 in Canada, there's also a national security criteria that is now applied. Now, what's the recent history? It's interesting that throughout the period, from 85 till now, we've added an investment. There have not been that many deals that have been turned away from Canada. And in fact, the biggest one that made the most noise was BHP Billiton, and it was from Australia, and it was about potash in Saskatchewan. And it wasn't about China. So, and I think the Chinese investors should take some solace in that. it isn't just about trying to single out a country. In certain areas, Canadians will be sensitive in regards to the ownership of resources and the control of resources. And then there was a more recent deal at McDonald Tétrault in the area of technology where the government said, no, we don't want this deal to go through. So I'm looking ahead. I think the outlook is positive. And yes, the rules will be maybe a little more stringent, but Canada needs the foreign direct investment. And I would look at the broader picture. And the broader picture of the relationship between Canada and China is that there's an extraordinary opportunity for us to work together and doing agreements and working together in regards to natural resources. And I would encourage that, and I would support that. Let me add one other thing. I think those who are investing, including SOEs in Canada, are looking at Canada not only as a place to invest, but as a trade platform and a trade route. The CNOC-Nexans deal wasn't mostly about Canada for CNOC. It was about the resources and the assets of Nexan all over the world. Remember something about Canada. We do 40% of the world's capitalization in mining. Canadian companies are funded in Canada, deploy all over the world. And the same is true in oil and gas. So as Canada looks to its future, I think our future lies in consolidating that position as a place where you will invest because it'll be your platform to go elsewhere in the world. And Chinese companies that see that and understand that will have a great advantage. The other dimension is Canada is within a very prosperous trade zone of NAFTA, which includes Mexico, which is going to experience great movement in the next few years, the United States and Canada, and we're about to, Canada, do a trade deal with Europe. So there's two dimensions to a Chinese company coming. You're part of a bigger trade zone, and you're entering a platform that would allow you, if you do it right, to deploy yourself all over the world in specific sectors.
Thank you. I'll address Mr. Zhang in Chinese. 这样行长在12先生讲的这个环境之下，我想看一下你的看法。未来5年或更长的时间，中资企业在加拿大的投资前景如何？
下午好。说实话，现在中国这1-2年在加拿大的投资应该是有一个很大的发展。但是呢，有很多加方应该是有很多人呢其实是反对中方去加拿大投资的，由于一些理事人士呢是强烈坚持的同时呢，我觉得呢，我们中国的很多企业呢就觉得呢，应该说加拿大这个尼克森这个收购案以后啊，其实本来咱们5年以前在加拿大，中国的企业的投资是很小，只占加拿大的不到1%的海外投资，也不到中国的对外投资的1%都不到。突然冒出了一个中国有史以来最大的一笔海外投资，那投完以后呢，按照加拿大政府的政策呢，是中国国有企业今后不能投这种大的项目空股，所以就是说，本身呢中国的企业很想去，但是去那的企业呢有很多问题，所以就是说，确实现在这个中国古话就是说你不纳，而且你欠还捡不纳是吧？就茫茫中当中，到底中国在加拿大投资未来会怎么发展？分析啊，应该是有3种情况，3种前景分析。第一种呢，就是按照现在维持现状，好不到哪儿，坏不到哪儿。目前我们中国应该说是加拿大的第2大贸易伙伴，是吧？也是加拿大海外出口市场在金融危机以后啊，应该是唯一持续保持增长的一个市场。但是呢，中国在加拿大的投资，其实呢应该是除了中海油两不说啊，应该成一个阿里特例，是吗？你几乎我估计很难有第2单了，所以它不能成一个平常的在加拿大的投资。所以我的意思呢，就是说。到目前为止，我们的在加拿大的投资跟我们跟加拿大的贸易之间，跟2国政府之间高度的互补的这种2国之间的这种高度的互补的经济状况，其实是很不提升的。所以呢，我估计呢，就是一种情况就是维持这种现状，大家什么刚才你们说的 right and left 左右嘛，有人反对，有人支持，那就可能就这种情况。所以呢，也好不到哪儿去，坏不到哪儿去。每年呢有那么几十亿到100亿美元的投资啊。这是一种前景分析。第2种前景分析呢，如果是说我们2国政府，还包括我们推的在座的企业，我们的代表能够共同努力， 努力奋斗，推动我们双方的投资，包括加拿大在中国的投资啊。所以我的意思呢，如果是大家能够从政策啊、从行动啊、从环境啊、从这方方面面啊，能够有好的这种模式做法，我估计呢，我们中国在加拿大投资会有一个好的前景。好的前景是什么意思啊？就现在美国在加拿大投资去年是2892亿美元，英国是886亿美元嘛，排第二，还有其他国家。但是如果是中国要是排第二的话，按照我们的贸易榜排第二，就是说我们到今年应该就是到1000亿美元。1000亿美元，我们现在的投资也是大概400亿美元，是吧？含其他含正含，而且还有600亿美元。600亿美元，按照前段时间说日控地区整个的资源开发需要600亿美元，所以我就说这是个好的前景啊，就能开发出来。但是呢，这个是有条件的。我说的第3种前景呢，就是说呢是一种比较差的前景。为什么我要说这个？可能在座的外亲说我们现在都来这儿，难道是故意差？但是呢，我觉得当局者清啊，旁观者迷嘛，因为我们是按照中国的相声来说，你们大声讲相声，你们是主讲，我们作为金融机构，包括我们公司啊，我们都服务你们的，我们是给你们开教的。其实你们企业很清楚。我的意思呢，就是说，其实现在中加，特别中国在加拿大投资存在很多障碍，也存在很多这个危机。如果这些问题不解决的话，我觉得，说实话，中国要想在加拿大大规模投资，加拿大要想大规模的吸引中国企业在加拿大投资的话，也仅仅只有5到10年的这么一个时间窗口。如果5到10年，中国不能在加拿大投资的话，我估计今后会有个50年左右的这个休眠期。所以我就说呢，我还觉得这个可能性还是比较大，除非我们能够改变目前的我们一些做法。谢谢。
那么讲行长，为什么您认为会有这种很差前景的可能性？你能不能讲一下原因在哪里呢？
因为我是做银行的嘛，因为这几年配合咱们中国的企业啊，一会儿加拿大的一些企业也在沟通交流过程中，按照我们中国讲，光打人一下不行，光谈恋爱不结婚不行，是吧？光结婚不生孩子也不行，是吧？所以呢，我就发现咱们其实现在就是谈恋爱，你是不是打雷是吧？我发现这个，我是在我们开发银行北京分行啊，负责加拿大我们那个 team 的一个小组长，负责具体工作的。我觉得这几年下来呀，这个巧妇难为这个劲儿使不上，所以呢，我们也有谈的呀。我今天来我们的冯处长还有我们吴经理，我们也在研究，所以呢，才有这么一个悲观的一个看法。我觉得这来自于我们5方面的因素，我是这么想的。第一个呢，我觉得呢，中加双方之间还是没有一个很好的合作共识，没有形成一个全面战略合作的关系。我记得哈佛总理去年2月份来中国访问，说是愿意跟中方建立战略合作关系。最后我看那个公报也没说。我觉得呢，表面上大家热热闹闹，是吧？都相互吸引，底下呢相互怀疑。中方呢就刚才是瞎胡闹，觉得中方要控制加拿大的企业。其实那个尼克森的那个资产在你们加拿大，不在你，他大量资产不在你们加拿大，其实只在我看那个材料，他的这个游戏资产只在你们加拿大的1%都不到。所以你说买你们的1%去控制加拿大的资源呢，这可能吧？完了，中国方面呢，其实也老觉得加拿大保守，是吧？也有一些怀疑。所以我的意思呢，就是说这方面呢，没有一个合作的共识，真正的战略的共识。第二点呢，我的意思呢，就是说我们现在加拿大的中国在加拿大投资啊，也就是向往出的3个致命的问题，一个就是少数民族问题、土著民族问题。第二个呢，就是说你今后要大规模，现在还好说，大规模的项目建设，就把我们中海油、中石化、中石油还有中途大量的企业的那些项目要建设起来的话，10年工人你绝对去。包括哈佛工人最近前段时间去北京考察，推动了一大项目，我觉得哈佛总理是英明的。其实你们推得出来，中国人现在也出来，你们也推，10年工人。我这个人呐，我们这个很关键的。我们有个项目在澳大利亚，他的那个劳动力成本，每周啊坐飞机去，坐飞机回呀，他的那成本比我们这些人估计都高啊。他1周都多少？就是我们像我们的成本，大量的那个经营成本就是这个工人的成本，年薪几10万，对不对？这你想想。所以我的意思呢，就是影响非常大。还有一个很致命的问题就是说，现在加拿大的项目，我觉得基础设施极其缺乏。 其实这个你说非洲嘛，比较落后嘛，缺乏竞争是气候的。加拿大你国家这么发达，当然也跟你们国土有关，也跟你们的这个是不是在美加边境有关。你现在你说的交通设施是东西向的，南北向的基本上没有，但是呢，你管到那东西向的有。所以的话，最后就形成什么呀？形成为什么？你比如在那个几内亚州旺季，澳大利亚的西澳洲，就是你有大量的资源，但是你运不出来。其实运不出来，那资本就不是资源。所以呢，就是说，我觉得你要运不出来，有啥就真的只能杀了，是吧？所以我的是第二个是有3个致命的问题，现实问题。第3个问题，我觉得就是说，我们现在的这个，咱们呢，我说的比较直啊，因为咱们一直上不是，我就说，今后咱们战略合作嘛，就是说，我觉得加拿大就是你们来中国，因为我们中国每个地方政府都有招商引资部门，跟你们一样，其实你们就是来招商引资的。我觉得你们的方式方法还是有待能够更好一些、更完善一些。因为我负责加拿大以后，突然发现啊，在加拿大的国际政府，从联邦一个部长接个部长，省长一个省长接个省长，市长台。当时2010年西部3省省长联合访华，10年9省省长联合访华。我觉得几乎每个月都有加拿大的高级干部来中国访华，啊，举办座谈会，类似今天这样的座谈会、论坛，啊，也有些签约，但是呢，真正的实现资金到位的不多。按照我们中国的考核，就是说，你这个资金不到位，相不出现产品，这都是忽悠。所以我的意思呢，就是说，现在缺的就是这个。我觉得呢，一定要改变这种。一会儿我再讲说起来，我觉得如果是30多分的话。那第4个问题，我觉得有什么问题啊？就是说，现在我们的这个，我觉得呢，就是一个国际的经济问题。到目前为止，我觉得9月份的话，我们中国习主席去中亚4国访问，签了很多能源大单，跟哈萨克斯坦啊，那几个国家。完了，加拿大有个媒体就报道了，加拿大对中国在中亚开展这个能源投资啊，感到这个危机和失望。我觉得这个报纸说的是对的，因为我为什么说啊？就是说，刚才大家说呢，中国的人口是吧？这个中国的经济也在发展，城市化率在提高，需要有原来足够的能源。但是我要告诉大家，中国的这个城市化率它到一定程度就达死。同时呢，中国现在在调整经济结构，同时呢，还有新的技术呢出现，代替新的能源。所以我的意思呢，中国在海外的这个能源啊、矿产资源的需求啊，这总量是一定的，不是一个无限制的、无边的。到一定程度的话，我们在整个世界资源的这么一个布局要布成以后，就是在中亚、在俄罗斯、在南美、在中东，那我可能50年以后再需要。那就是未来3到50年，咱们加拿大资源就开发不出来。这50年以后是不是有新的技术？那不好说啊。最近美国一个特斯拉那个电动汽车，大家看看，充一次电能跑485公里，而且现在大家都说呢，沙漠的光伏发电正在推，这要建成以后，我觉得10年以后可能汽车真的不需要石油了。那时候咱们的油价就真的成沙了。所以呢，我的意思呢就是说呢，这还有这么一个时间窗口，所以我就说。从这几个方面考虑啊，我们现在呀，还是有合作的潜力感，有一些危机感。
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jiang kind of focused a bit on the fact that the ways that Canadian investment attraction is working, is happening aren't working. Sarah, what, in your opinion, how should a Canadian company or a Canadian investment promotion group attract Chinese investment? How do we get the attention of Chinese investors, and how can we do better?
I think Mr. Jiang has covered a lot on this topic at the macro, level. Okay. And he did give, I think, from what I learned from him, there is a sense of urgency for Canada, in attracting, investment from China, and where China, is the largest consumer for imported energy. But I guess I can just, from my practice, and then just give some comments at the, micro level. Okay, I think yeah, Ms. Zhang mentioned that we see many delegations, investment attraction delegations to come to China, and for the purpose of efficiency, I would really give them two pieces of advice. One is to go to second-tier cities, okay, to attract audience and investment. For historical reasons, most mining companies and energy companies are located in the remote areas in China, and that's where the headquarters are and where the decisions are made for those medium-sized mining companies. And those companies, they are, I think it's more effective to hold a presentation to them at the provincial capital city. Because they can't just go to the provincial capital city by car, by train, making same-day trip, and they get full attention, no competition from other provinces. And that's much better for them than to fly to Beijing and then at big cost, and then found themselves overshadowed by large SOEs who always get more attention. So I think just be a very pragmatic way is to make a presentation for the governors from the provinces, make a presentation at in the second-tier city. And the second advice I would give them is to go for Chinese private companies. And this is simply designed to be adaptable to the post-ICA investment environment in Canada. Despite the widespread view that the SOE are getting bigger while the Chinese private sector is getting weaker, the truth is that Chinese private companies have enjoyed huge growth. For the past 10 years, benefiting from the China economic growth. And they have very strong incentives to go out, to make investment overseas. They have more opportunity. They have opportunity investing in energy sector, where there is a restriction on private investor to invest in China, in energy sector in China. Okay, so the overseas market open up to them, and also they are. I think more and more Chinese private companies, the owners, are inclined to diversify their assets. Keep some in China where the growth is big, but also make investment overseas. So that's very practical advice.
Good advice. We are actually often at the council advising people to go to secondary cities. There's a lot of competition in Beijing. You can see we're competing with England this week, for example, in terms of delegations. Mr. Charest, another thing that Mr. Zhang mentioned was the importance of infrastructure and the fact that infrastructure investments are often peripheral investment projects that then allow some of the core resource investments to take place. And you were involved with Plan Nord in Quebec, and there you have places without much infrastructure. So can you talk about the infrastructure play, as well as just in general what investment opportunities you think we should be looking at in Canada?
Well, the infrastructure issues in Canada are obvious. We are a northern country. And a country of 35 million people with a strong concentration of our population within 100 kilometers of the American border. So we have this vast landmass. And so, yes, there are infrastructure issues that are relative to the very nature of the country, period. Now, anytime we talk about a project in the area of resources, whether it's mining, oil and gas, it is synonymous with infrastructure. You are talking about infrastructure simultaneously. When we did the Plan A for north of Quebec is everything above the 49th parallel. Now this is, I'll give you a picture. It's a territory that is twice the size of France. There are 120,000 people who live in this territory. I know them all personally. There are 4 First Nations. Now that doesn't stop a company like Wisco, who has a $13 billion project in the area of Wyoming, because it's the very nature of Canada. Now 80% of this territory, the Plan A, has never been surveyed for minerals. That's how new the territory is. So that's not a knock against Canada, it's just the way the planet is. It's one of the last virgin territories on the planet. And by the way, half of it will be protected from industrial development. So that's part of the greatness of Canada. It's a challenge, obviously, to develop this part of the world, but it will be developed, and the governments have to play a role in allowing its development to support the infrastructure that will give us access to the resources. I'll give you one example of how new this is. I was the Federal Minister of Environment in the early 90s. Companies came to me asking us for a permit to search for diamonds in Canada. We thought they were crazy. Today, Canada is the 2nd biggest producer of diamonds in the world. Quebec will open its first diamond mine right in the smack in the middle of the territory in 2016. Minister Izé was here earlier, announced that the government that succeeded my government is going to be building a train route through that piece of the territory of the Plan A to have access to the territory. So infrastructure is a challenge, but I think where there will be good projects. Now the status quo, by the way, is not on for anyone in this world. And we've seen a marked difference in the level of interest of Chinese companies coming to Canada. By the way, over the last few years, Canada has been receiving more foreign Chinese investment than the United States. Yes, there have been huge deals like CNOC and Nexen that weigh in that, of course. But overall, if you look at where Chinese companies have been going to invest, whether it's Europe or whether it's the United States or Canada, they will find, generally, that there are conditions they have to meet. Now, wherever they go, frankly, what I've observed from those who have been successful is that they work upstream. And what does that mean? They've done a lot of work before actually going ahead with the project, within the community, with government, with people who give them good advice on how you make a deal happen, how you invest, and generally companies, whatever the environment, I'm ready to bet a Chinese company, whether they go to Europe, whether they go to the United States, or they come to Canada, if they do all of that work upstream, and some of them do not do it, some of them do it well, they will greatly increase their chances of success. And that's true for Canada.
Thanks. One of the questions from the audience is actually quite similar to what I'm going to ask. And it talks a little bit about the contradictions that are existing. Canada announces it's joining having the foreign investment promotion agreement, yet at the same time, you'll see 60 has caused foreign investors, especially Chinese investments, to dry up. So there are some mixed signals. So this question is, what does Canada need to do or say to encourage foreign investments? And for any of our panelists, this is...
Well, I think we need to make a better case of what the complementarities are between Canada and China. And that means the Foreign Investment Protection Act is a part of that. We may talk about that later in this panel. I think Canada and China should look at the broader relationship and how it needs to be managed in a way where we directly encourage investment in the area of resources at conditions that are acceptable for both sides. And then we should start looking at new areas like agri-food, where the needs are extraordinary in China, frankly, and where Canada's branding is extremely strong, and where there are real opportunities. The Smithfields deal in the United States is a very good example I think, of what we will see in terms of a new sector of activity in agri-food, where Canada has outstanding opportunities for those of us in this room who see that. So I'm optimistic. I think that we will see more activity. And let me add another twist to that. Bear in mind, Canada is, and the business leadership in Canada, and I think the political leadership are fairly frustrated with the Keystone process in Canada now. This is a pipeline project to the South United States. A lot of our oil and gas is enclaved in Alberta, and we are selling our oil and gas at a premium because we're enclaved. And we need other markets. And that's part of the lesson we learned of this financial economic crisis. And I think because of that dynamic, this is going to create within Canada, I think, a much more openness and a bigger thrust it already has of us selling resources to Asia and China in particular.
OK，蒋行长，你在这方面也有一个看法。我觉得我们讲过那个，为了有那个比较乐观的那个前景，加拿大必须要做什么或说什么，为了改善这个情况。
我刚才说的是要差的前景，还是说的重了一点，而是引起重视。但是我的意思呢，就是说，应该说是只要我们努力啊，我们还是能取得非常好的这个效果。首先呢，应该是从中国来说，我觉得在所有的西方国家里面，中国对加拿大，我觉得呢还是有一种特殊的感情的，来自很多方面。没有这种感情啊，那应该说也没那么多华侨到加拿大去，应该说是世界上最大的华侨。因为我觉得我们从小是吧，说过，我是说过，我们了解的几个外国人是排除，可能第二个才是马克思。这段时间是很有关系，第二年很有缘分。去年是咱们莫言或者罗伯维先讲，今年就是加拿大的门罗是吧？或者罗伯维先讲是吧？这个相信在中国是最有文化传统的，最喜闻乐见的。哪个国家的外国说相声说的话是咱们加拿大大翻，所以我就说这些啊，就说咱们之间呢是有很好的这个合作的历史渊源，所以大家今后啊多交流多沟通。我觉得呢应该咱们带头的更推动啊，我们中加两个政府之间要建立全面的、长期的战略合作关系。从这个角度，我觉得呢我们是前进，这是第一点。第二呢，我觉得另外一方面我想到什么呢？就是说。现在最关键的，我觉得就是说，中国的企业啊，当然我们有那么刚刚走出去嘛，没有经验。我们统计过，中国在海外投资的企业60%是不成功的，或者是遇到了很多困难。听说在加拿大更高，因为我们也是不经北区啊，这个也是我们跟这个在家投资这些企业开过股市做上会，他们都有很多算账股嘛，他们给我们的概念就是说，大概在加拿大，中国的企业在加拿大投资80%是遇到困难、遇到问题啊，有不成功的。所以我觉得呢，只要我们两家，因为我觉得呢，两国政府之间今年已经完成了叫中加国土经济研究报告，我觉得两个政府已经很重视，带头的我们方面包括我们前省长都在重视这个问题。所以呢，下次我估计啊，我建议咱们双方推动啊，中加两国政府啊，研究如何什么解决中加两国企业的投资承担问题，包括中国在加拿大和加拿大是中国的，完了如何提高咱们企业的成功率，提高他们的投资回报，我觉得这个是有可能性的。这个只要解决得好，比咱们招商引资更有吸引力，那个影响力非常大，那是有非常大的吸引力。第三点，我的意思呢，就是说，现在应该说从这个加拿大的有关省政府啊和这个中央政府也都在重视，就是说呢，推动加拿大的基础设施建设，比如西部3省，包括这个，我的建议啊，不是说光2省和这个 BC 省。建立这管道，这管道还要延长到沙省，是吧？你沙省的话，你那些资源没有管道，最后也去不了。所以的话呢，就是说呢，这都在推。我觉得而且刚才说呢，这个魁北克的北方计划，你那个南北800多公里的，铁路啊、港口啊、电力建设等等，这都是要推。而且呢，这个呢，应该说也是有可能性的。就是说，我们认为呢，就是说，未来5到10年，加拿大的支撑加拿大的。外国来加拿大投资的基础设施建设，我觉得呢，应该说是能够实现的。第4点，我觉得就是说， 刚刚说呢，就是说我们加拿大呀，这2年来中国呀，算计加拿大的投资环境、投资项目，我就建议呢，刚才说呢，你要学习我们中国的地方政府招商引资。第一呢，我觉得你们来先做好充分的准备，要进行研究，要提出项目的清单，要每个项目呢，你都有一些基本的材料、具体材料，总投资多少啊，是吧？你投资回报是个什么情况啊？风险点在哪儿啊？因为你要换位思考，你是向中国的企业算计嘛？就像你这个谈恋爱的话，你说我漂亮，我英俊，我有钱，我有房子，是吧？很优秀，但是就是这意思啊。你说你要算计，否则你泛泛而谈。中国的企业因为存在着文化的差异、语言的差异、法律的差异，它如何决策？所以我的意思呢，把基本功要做足，让中国的企业能够决策、早决策、早投资、早建项目，招收2个人。所以我的意思呢，这点也是我建议大家的，就是说我们在座的都是专家呢，因为你要换位思考。中国有个古话，到什么山上藏什么锅，是吧？你见到农民，你一个说土话；你见到我们这些知识分子，你一个说洋话。我说洋话不是英语，你说的文雅点，阳春白雪，下里巴人，我们中国什么？就是说你要每个具体的项目，你都要有这个具体材料来推动。我觉得有些国家呢，那招商引资做的比较好。最近巴西的言下有钱的招投标，网上大家都看到，人家就做得非常好，一天下来基本上都掌握了，都不用我们再去过，当然需要考察，不用再去了，到时候再说，否则泛泛而谈，我们再去考察，中国其实也不容易，你们来一次也不容易，是我的意思。还有一点呢，就是最后一点，我就建议我的措施呢，就是说，建议我们在座的加拿大从联邦政府到地方省政府、市政府，包括地方的企业，真的你们要有危机感、时间长。我刚才说了，从网上看到4月份，大概是预想啊，说中国要在俄罗斯采购2700亿美元，未来10年的事业。最近在这个中亚，大家看到网上都能看到，还有最近巴西在全球招投标，是吧？这言下有钱等等。最近委内瑞拉就变成世界第1的石油大国了。10年前巴西还是无油的，现在全球招投标，所以的话，它这个发展很快。所以我的意思呢，就是说，中国的需要资源、矿物、能源，但是这个需求量是有限的，是有一定量的。这个量的话呢，全球都在竞争，所以中国的一旦布局好了以后，他不会说我现在就花钱买未来50年的，当然可能是要啊，但是一个企业的话，我估计看不到那么远，而且也不变了，能力都在发展，所以我的意思呢，就是说大家要有这时间感，谢谢。
Thank you. Jeffrey's going to kick us off the stage in just a minute. So I wanted to just give our other 2 panelists a chance in a minute or less to kind of give their opinion. We've heard kind of a summary here of there's a short window of opportunity. Chinese investors are getting somewhat impatient and their needs are changing. We're needing to market ourselves better. We're needing to understand the needs of Chinese companies better. And with all that we've learned today, all the points we've talked about, let's start with Sarah. What would be the one thing you think Canadians should take away from this in terms of what Canada needs to do better to be successful?
Well, I like to talk about the different styles, different approach, different decision making process among different investors. Yeah, so it's always come back to my practice. I mean, the private companies. Basically, so what's expectation that Canadian companies should have in dealing with their counterparts? The private companies and quite many local SOEs, their style is more like CEO in charge, or we call the one-man show. Once the CEO makes up his mind, then the rest, the only issue is how for his team to implement the deal. And so I think the key to make the deal happen there is really to have the 2 CEOs to have chemistry with each other.
So the 2 leaders.
Yeah, 2 CEOs on both sides to have chemistry with each other, spend time together, visiting homes sometimes if it's necessary, I mean, and allow the CEO, especially the Chinese CEO, to develop a sense of ownership of that project. And then that's much, yeah. And then, but on the contrary, the central SOE is much more, has much more layers of decision making in terms of their decision making process, and they are more, with more check and balance. So
you really have to understand who you're working with.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. And Mr. Charest, we'll give you the last word. What would be your one thing?
I'm very optimistic about the relationship. I think, if you look at the recent numbers of the increase in trade between China and Canada, all the numbers are going in the right direction. As we look ahead, there's one thing that was mentioned that I think is true. Canadian companies need to look beyond Beijing and Shanghai. Certainly the provinces are doing that. The province of Quebec has developed a relationship with the province of Shandong. And you're quite right, Sarah, about the fact there are POEs that are not, visible to those who come here for the first time, but are there. There's opportunities. There's new sectors. Then that's recent in the foodstuffs. Service industry for China is also going to be growing at a very rapid clip, and that presents new opportunities. And I think Canada should take up the signal that China sent to it after the signing of the foreign investment, or the agreement on the foreign investment agreement, of doing a broader trade agreement between China and Canada. And Australia is negotiating. Why should Canada not take up that invitation and do it aggressively? And finally, I think we should be part of the Canada-China Business Council.
That's a great way to end. I thank our panelists for a really stimulating discussion. There are a whole bunch of questions we didn't get to, so I wish we had had more time, but hopefully during the networking cocktail, we can perhaps address them one-on-one. So please join me in thanking our panelists.